This review is for The Art of Batman Begins, Shadows of the Dark Knight by Mark Kotovaz, published by Chronicle Books in 2005. So this book kind of gets a lot of negative attention because of the lack of art in the book, and I do agree. Calling this an art book is kind of ridiculous because there just really is not a lot. I mean, even the page count is slightly thinner than the usual art book, but then just the pages and art within is so sparse, there's really not a lot. But if you come to this book prepared for that, knowing that, I still think there's a lot of enjoyment to be got out of this book. In fact, rather than thinking of it as a crappy art book, I prefer to think of it as an okay making of book. Because in my mind, what really saves this book is the text. I mean, you're probably only getting a couple of paragraphs every couple of pages, but the text that is there is really good making of behind-the-scenes information. That's a lot better than the information you usually find in art books, which is why I sort of think of this as more of a making of book, because there's not a lot of art. The text is good, and then there's a lot of like photography and documents and things. It's more just sort of like almost like a scrapbook of the making of the movie in a way. I'm a big fan of the Dark Knight trilogy, but the books that have been published about the movie have been very hit and miss. Well, mostly miss. So for Batman Begins, they published this book and then a script book, which was just the script, and then a book called The Official Batman Begins, The Official Movie Companion, which did have a little bit of sort of behind-the-scenes interview and stuff, but mostly it was just a bit more of the sort of like promotional fluff stuff, talking about the characters in the world and stuff like that. And then for The Dark Knight, they published the really terrible, quote-unquote, behind-the-scenes book that was mostly just the shooting script that I've done a review on. Then they also published a book called The Dark Knight Manual, which was on like the gadgets and vehicles and suit and characters. It was presented as a fiction book, almost like, you know, Batman's files, and it had removable elements, so it was pretty fun, but it wasn't really about the art or making of the movie, even though it did utilize a lot of the concept art from the movie. In fact, a lot of the stuff that appears in this book is also reprinted in that book. I mean, really, for this trilogy, the only book that really hit the nail on the head, they finally got it right for The Dark Knight Rises, with the book The Art and Making of the Dark Knight Trilogy, which obviously covers the whole trilogy, and was really the only good book on those movies. But in looking at this book and the Dark Knight one, I can't help but wonder if maybe that's not necessarily a problem with the authors or the publishers, but rather the quantity and types of concept art that was being produced for these films, because you have to remember the approach that was taken for these films was to make Batman as realistic as possible, and even though that's a really great approach for the films, it doesn't necessarily translate well into a good art book, because I get why a lot of people would be disappointed with the artworks in this book, because Batman comes from comic books, which are such a highly visual, dynamic, stylized medium, to then come to this book and see art that is sort of honestly pretty boring might be a bit of a disappointment, because like say take for instance a much crappier film like Batman and Robin. Even though that film was obviously much worse than Batman Begins, the concept art was arguably much better, or at least more entertaining, because you look at things and all the weapons and locations and characters are sort of much more stylized and fantastical, whereas the design decisions for this movie were based on removing any sort of fantastical over-the-top elements, which again made for a very interesting superhero film, but doesn't necessarily make for a great art book. And so essentially the art you're getting in here is basically broken up into the Batmobile, gadgets, the suit, and then Gotham City. And that's basically it. And so what's weird is, like, even though the Batmobile is one of those sections and takes up about 30 pages of the book, I don't think there is a single piece of actual art on the Batmobile. It's all just like models and photographs and things like that. So yeah, again, not much of an art book, but still seeing the clay models and the miniatures they made out of existing like car kits and things like that was still pretty enjoyable. But for me personally, I'm just not really a big fan of this sort of tech style of, you know, and even like Gotham, which I think is probably one of my favorite fictional cities of all time. The Gotham depicted in the concept art is sort of similar to the way it was in the films, which is it wasn't really a character, it wasn't really the Gotham that I imagine, like, say even like the 89 Tim Burton Batman movie, I'm not a big fan of that movie, but the way that Gotham was presented was excellent, you know, with all the smog, and it's sort of like it's really sort of gritty noir city, but has these sort of like really fantastical elements and, you know, over-the-top characters and things like that, and over-the-top locations, and a real sort of gothic feel, and fog and blimps and searchlights and all that really great stuff that is completely absent from this film. And again, I keep saying it, that works for this film, but not really fun to go through and look through in an art book. The Gotham presented here is really just kind of like looking at, it could be art for kind of any city in the world. It's not very exciting, and on the whole, I just am not really a big fan of the style of art presented here, of gadgets and tech and cars and things like that. It's not really my thing, but I mean, some people could look at this stuff and really actually enjoy this, really enjoy getting a look at how you take these sort of over-the-top ideas like a Batmobile, a Batsuit, and how you marry those concepts with semi-realistic application. And yes, I am sure there are a lot of people out there who will actually enjoy a lot of the design elements shown in this book. However, even they will definitely be left wanting a lot more. The other thing I really liked about this book, besides the text, was actually, even though there isn't a lot of content in this book, the actual variety is pretty nice. You get blueprints, you're getting obviously concept art, physical miniatures, models, all sorts of renders and a map of Gotham, and tons of storyboards, which was really nice. I think there were about maybe 10 pages of storyboards, and those were really cool to see. So this is definitely one of those books that I enjoy doing a flip through for, getting the chance to show you what it looks like inside, so that you can hopefully avoid any disappointment. Because if you do like what you're seeing in here, and you can measure your expectations accordingly, and you can find this book for a reasonable price, then I do think there is a certain amount of enjoyment to be got out of this book for the fan of these movies.